welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Nancy Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Hello, and welcome to the show, Joshua Maddux. Super excited to have you.
Awesome. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So we have a lot of things, just before we hit record, we had quite a few interesting and relevant topics that we were potentially going to chat about. But before we get into that, who is Josh? Well, Joshua Maddux is the CEO of 95 Visual. He has an in-depth background in website planning, strategy, development, and architecture. Over the past decade, he's seen countless businesses struggle with their website, websites that can't easily be found, poorly represent their brand, hard to update. You guys, I'm sure, are very familiar with these problems. Anyway, Josh's team, their specialty has really been around developing processes and solutions that transform businesses. So this is not just developing solutions for the clients themselves, but he's actually got some really interesting ideas and approaches around process and making client projects flow far more smoothly. And I'm super excited to get into this. So thanks, Josh. Welcome to the show. Once again, why don't you start by giving us just a little bit of an introduction to you and what you do?
Yeah, awesome. So obviously, as you said, owner of 95 Visual. So we are web design and branding and marketing firm located just north of Los Angeles. And so for us, what we're really looking to do is help businesses that don't fit that cookie cutter mold. If, a company has a tire shop, there's tire shop type website companies that are out there that, reproducing that would be rather expensive for them. Where the marketing element that we can help utilize for a small business and we can help build out, helps their business grow, helps them transform, helps them stabilize in that process. And so for us, it's really about just helping that business grow.
Excellent. I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate on that. So, we've talked about quite a few different kind of approaches you take to this. I'm wondering, what are maybe some of the issues that you've come up against? I know we've talked, one of the things you were mentioning is that you can have this very powerful way of sitting down with a prospect and kind of setting expectations at the beginning of the project in a way that's really meaningful and carries through and kind of simplifies things throughout. I'm wondering, what sorts of issues have you come across in projects and with clients and with timelines that, caused you to need these sorts of solutions?
Yeah. So we've been doing this 11 years. We've definitely seen our share of issues. And I hate to paint a bad light for any of our clients or any future client, but there is the aspect of, our clients have a day-to-day operation to run and they get busy. And doing a new website is essentially like onboarding a new employee. And sometimes they're not really ready to spend the time to train a new employee. And they don't realize that a website is going to be a little bit of a process, to have a design custom created, to have copy, like Anansi does, to have that custom created. It's not just a 5-minute, click 2 buttons and hit go and copy paste. It's really a custom design process for them. And that is really where a lot of this stuff for us has come out of, is how do we create a custom site, a custom design, a custom brand for each client, but that still meets a specific standard, still has a process and still has an outline. And so some of those challenges, we've had sites that it's been a year and a half from the time the site is done till the day we get content for the website. And so 18 months that site sat on a dev server, not live, because the client didn't have time to finish the content. And so these are the elements for us that how do we avoid those problems and not run into that? So let's make sure we have content on the forefront of the project, specifically why we partnered with Anansi. And how do we make sure we have photography or make sure we have any of these other resources from our clients, up front. And so we have sort of developed a little bit of a packet system that we have our clients sort of go through. And there's like an initial meeting one. There's one that talks about their ideal client. There's a logo design one. If they're doing marketing, we have sort of a marketing questionnaire. We have a bio writer. And so it helps like executives write their own bio. It's literally a Mad Lib style fill in the blank type element, but it helps get them started. And that's really a lot of this type of stuff. If a designer has no direction in color or graphics or any of that, they can't go anywhere. You need a base direction to start heading. If you're heading out the door for a trip or anywhere, you need at least a general direction, and you can sort of define that as you get going. And that's oftentimes what we really find is some of these clients just don't know what direction they want to even go. And so having them start to answer some basic questions about what is the goal for your website? Why are you redoing your website now? What are the pain points you're struggling with? Just really allows them to put all that sort of on paper and explain that. And then from there, we can dive into it a little further and actually walk through those pain points and address those one by one.
Okay, so there's lots to unpack here. And I think these are kind of concepts or approaches that many of our listeners, certainly problems that many of our listeners are familiar with, but some approaches here as some valuable approaches here as well. So the first thing that I'm hearing is that, you really have leveraged resources and templates for some of the kind of critical elements of the process that clients struggle with, where you need input from them. I think we can all agree that client delays are one of the primary reasons for delays on a project. And I'm kind of hearing that it can be difficult for them to get started thinking about things. And for us, as contractors and producers and et cetera, it's very easy for us to jump in. But by, giving clients the resources they need to begin to think in a certain direction, you can kind of leverage that as a jumping off point to get more meaningful responses and more meaningful, stuff from your client. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yep, exactly. And sometimes it's elements that these businesses haven't even necessarily thought of. We had a prospect who approached us, and they, just sake of argument or sake of conversation here, they do like high-end luxury like pools for your backyard. And so in the conversation of who is your ideal client, like what's their income level, what's their age, that type of stuff. Do they own a home? Do they not? And they're like, well, pretty much anybody, we're in California. So they're like, pretty much anybody in California would be perfectly fine, as a prospect. And it's like, well, that person who lives in an apartment is probably not a customer. And so it's starting to hone in on that. It's making sure that you're not advertising your brick and mortar 3 states over, that you're actually only advertising your brick and mortar store, plus 15 miles or plus whatever that is. And that's where a lot of businesses start to get not honestly in over their head, but it is sort of in over their head a little bit with some of the marketing aspects. And that's something that, on the marketing side of things, us or any other marketing agency would look at and go, no, those are pretty easy, pretty straightforward, and just sort of outline those elements. But it's ensuring that those questions are asked. And, you brought up a sort of a templated method, and we're very careful in using that phrase specifically because what we're building at the end of the day is totally custom to the client. We're not templating things. And so we even call like our forms that we have, they're packets. And so we're very specific in that they're sort of workbook packets that we have those clients go through. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And actually, thank you for that correction on that. And thanks for specifying, because we have actually found, I think that's kind of there's quite a bit of gold there, but piece of gold, that we found in our own business is that what you call an element of your, process or of your brand or of your business really makes a big difference. For us, a really simple example of this would be at the end of every project, we do something that we used to call an experience interview. And this is an opportunity for us to reflect and see how it went and et cetera. And we were finding that strategists were having a lot of difficulty getting partners to attend this meeting because they were saying, oh, well, we've worked together before. I've already given you kind of a testimonial or something. What more do you need? Or, the experience wasn't that different. But we found that simply by changing it, for example, to a wrap-up call, all of a sudden it went from, oh gosh, there's this extra thing you're kind of asking us to do at the end of the project that feels kind of onerous to, well, of course there's a wrap-up call at the end, right? That just makes sense. So even as simple, it might seem a little bit, pedantic to kind of make these word choices of templates versus packet, but they really, really make a difference. Just, again, I'm all about those specific words, but, for our listeners, I think they may not be aware of just the power of perception, how people are perceiving these things that we're giving them. So sorry, a little bit of a sidestep there, but I want to come back to what you were saying. I think that this isn't a new concept that I've heard to kind of have clients engage and answer questions. What I'm hearing from you is, one of the things that kind of sets you guys apart is that it sounds like these questionnaires are kind of a jumping off point for conversation rather than kind of the be all and end all of the data that you're collecting. Is that so? Like, are these linked to kind of like meetings? Like, what do you do with the answers to these questionnaires or to these packets? Sorry, I want to use your language. Packets.
Yeah. And I will add the wrap-up call is a great idea. I think we're actually going to steal that.
Go right ahead.
That is great. No, so you're 100% right. These are not the end all be all. So we have like our initial meeting packet is like 7 pages. And it is in depth. It walks through a lot of things. And why do you not like your own website? What are sites you do like or don't like or all that? And we use it for a few things. It helps us get a better idea for a project scope so we can quote the project correctly. We actually have a grid on one of the pages that talks about like photography. Are they expecting us to come in with a camera crew and shoot a ton of photos of their facility? Are they expecting, us to produce a bunch of content, which means you guys would be, Nancy would be doing that. Are they providing all of this information? And so just as any other agency owner would know, if everything is all packaged up in a nice little zip file with a bow on it, it's going to make that project go a lot smoother than if the agency has to chase for that content or chase for those images or any of that type of stuff. And so it also helps us gauge a little bit of if the client doesn't fill it out or fills it out only 10%. And we have to start really chasing them just to get answers of, we'll have things like there's a question that says, what does your company do? And we'll have clients or prospects who write see website. And it's like, okay, well, obviously your website's wrong because you're coming to us. Something on your website isn't correct. And so you're asking us to see the wrong information. And if we just take the wrong information and reiterate on it, it's going to be wrong again. And so that's why we need to not look at your current website for what you're doing. We're asking you. And so once that packet's filled out, we do a quote and do some of that stuff. But that packet actually then lives on through the project. And so when we do a project kickoff call and we do our design teams on it, I'm on it, and the client's on the call. And so our whole team is on that call. We actually go through the packet with the client, and the designer will read through the packet ahead of time, look at all the answers they put on the questions. And then during that call, they'll say, hey, you mentioned, you liked bright colors. Is that bright colors in this essence or that? And so we really use that as a conversational piece to continue to drive that forward as we start the project.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, of course, it makes a lot of sense to me. As you know, that is quite a bit how we work as well, even as subcontractors who are coming in after this part of the process has already been done. We follow a very similar model where we're looking at it and using it as a jumping off point for more meaningful questions instead of, just kind of taking things at face value and being like, oh, seeing that answer. I'm sure you guys see that answer, see website. What I'm hearing from you is that means more than just, oh, that information is on the website. It's an opportunity for you to identify where the gaps in your information are, where the gaps in their information are, but more importantly, to actually kind of read between the lines a little bit and identify kind of like yellow and red flags with potential clients before you're in bed with them, so to speak, before you decide to go out on that date even. So this actually kind of answers the next question that I had, which was, let me just back up here. Something I hear quite a bit from people who, are engaging people in forms of some kind, or, packets or questions or some sort of, homework situation, is that it can be challenging to help the client see the value of this. So is this something where, is it kind of as cut and dried as you said, where, they don't fill out those sorts of things, you can kind of understand that they're probably not a good fit to work with? Or do you have to do some work up front to kind of help them understand the value of doing that kind of homework?
It's half and half. And the one thing I will add with, some of the reading into, I'll circle back on your question here in a second, but like the reading into, if someone says like, see current website or something like that, we'll ask the questions of like, why do you not like your current website? And if the client goes, well, we don't like it because we don't feel like it properly reflects our business. And I'm like, okay, well, if we're looking at this, like you're in this repetitive pattern that you're just going to repeat again. We're not going to provide the service that you're looking for. So either A, you guys need to change the process that you're going about getting a new website, or we're not the right fit and we'll turn down those projects. And so then on the other side of, we definitely do have clients that don't fill out those packets. We work with like the University of Santa Barbara is a client of ours. And so we work with some larger clients that are more bid opportunity type. Those types of projects, they don't fill those out. And that's totally fine. However, we do typically go through a little bit more of a discovery phase. And so the packet itself is more or less the first half of a discovery phase. And so the client who doesn't necessarily want to go through the packet, just wants a quote, we'll give them a rough, if they give us an explanation of sort of roughly what they're looking for, we can give them a rough ballpark. But what we've found is typically the client who doesn't want to spend the 20 to 30 minutes to sit down and fill out that type of a packet doesn't really want to invest more than like $1,000 on a website. And they want all the bells and whistles, they want custom content and everything else. And so it really ends up being something where it's like, okay, you really aren't investing the time in your site. And again, this is something I said towards the beginning of the podcast, I believe, but like a business who's bringing on a new website, it's like training a new employee. And if you hire a new employee, but you don't have the time to train them, they're just going to sit in the corner and either do one of two things. One, if we're just copy pasting content from your old website that's misinformation, you're a roofing contractor and it says you do bathroom remodels. Now your full-time salesperson who's working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, even when you're on vacation, is running around telling everybody that you're a roofing contractor that does bathroom remodels, and that's not what you do. And so that's for us is where explaining that type of stuff to the client. And a lot of this process is really just building the trust with them and explaining why it's valuable and just walking through that. And if it's something that they don't see, they don't understand, and they're just sadly not going to get, then it's something that we don't move forward. And sadly, those are oftentimes the ones that we'll see them 6 months or a year from now when they go and buy a cookie cutter website, end up in the same boat that they are right now, except, they end up spending a few $1,000s. And as all other agency owners and contractors probably understand, like it's one of those things where it's like, if they would make that adjustment or take the advice, the process would be so much less painless, but they have to do it their way and it is what it is. Yeah. And it's sad to watch.
No, absolutely. I think we've all seen those businesses or, those organizations that we really, really, really kind of stand behind what they do, or we really, really, really want to help them. Yeah. But the old adage remains true, which is that you can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. And part of that includes being willing or able, to be fair, or able to make the investment of both kind of often of time, trust, as well as finances, right? Because what I'm hearing from you is that often on those smaller clients where maybe the budget isn't there, where they do want all those bells and whistles and stuff, either there's just a mismatch between what they understand is possible for a certain budget, or there's a lack of trust there to, focus on the elements that are going to move the needle rather than the bells and whistles that look shiny.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So I kind of want to switch our focus a little bit here. I think this has all been really, really amazing and really valuable, but I want to chat a little bit around accessibility. Now, this may seem kind of like a 90-degree turn for some of our listeners, but I think this is all part of the larger conversation that we've been having around identifying clients' needs versus their wants, potential dangers, potential things that are going on also in the industry. So, accessibility compliance is something that I personally have been hearing more and more about in the web, I would say past 6 months or so. Why don't you give us a little bit of introduction as to what this is and why is it important?
Yeah. Yeah. So especially in the US, accessibility compliance in the past, especially like you said, 6 months has really come into the light. It has been something that businesses, typically small businesses, don't exactly understand the extent of it. They understand, we have a brick and mortar and we have a wheelchair ramp out front and we have handicap parking. We're good to go. But typically what a business needs to look at is opening a website is basically like opening a second location. You need to, again, and this goes back to like what we just talked about with, training a salesperson, your new website. Like you need to have that. It costs to keep your website online and, you're paying to keep the lights on there and all that type of stuff. And so the same thing goes without saying for ADA compliance. It affects websites as well. And so Domino's Pizza, about a year or so ago, had a court case filed against them, and then it ended up finalizing January of this year. And basically they got sued for a very large amount of money for someone not being able to order a pizza that was visually impaired. Myself personally, I wear glasses. So I technically, US law, fall under someone who's visually impaired. It's on my driver's license that I have to wear glasses while driving. And so it's been something that, it's affecting large companies, and there's tons of big name companies that you can Google search and find court case after court case after court case for, Hulu, for half the main big grocery stores, for a lot of these big name companies. But it's also now starting to extend into small business because so many people are realizing that literally all they have to do from an attorney's perspective, all they have to do is file a letter to the business saying, hey, we believe your website's not ADA compliant. And if it's not, then pay us $20,000. And it's literally extortion, which is what's ridiculous in that sense. And so there was a hotel that had a $15,000 settlement out of court because somebody who was visually impaired couldn't book a hotel room. And now I'm not saying that websites shouldn't be ADA accessible or should not be accessible. I believe very strongly that, anyone, whether it's a visual impairment or motor skills and they're not able to actually move a physical mouse and they have to navigate a page via keyboard, that also falls under this accessibility aspect. So oftentimes people are like, well, I don't really have any, text in my images and I have some alt text on my images, so we're good. And it's like, okay, can I use the tab key and tab around your website to click on your menu items and click on, the submenus or other links on your page? And this all sort of goes into the aspect for us of helping our clients just be more prepared, whether it's website accessibility or the process that we go through to do a website or any of that.
Okay, thank you. That definitely digs into, I think this is potentially things that a lot of people aren't necessarily thinking about. It's not that Hulu or Domino's are trying to exclude people, is what I'm hearing from you. More so that it isn't something that before, 6 months ago or whatever, or a year ago or whatever that was, it wasn't something that was really prevalent within the industry as an issue. So now, obviously, this is starting to rise in the kind of consumer consciousness. These big companies, have been sued. How important is it for a small business to tackle this? Is this kind of like cross your T's and dot your I's type of a thing? Is this a real danger, or is this a real opportunity being missed? Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. So sort of speaking to all that, just as a statistical element, in the United States, there is approximately 20% of the US population who struggle with accessibility in one sense or another and have an issue accessing websites. So 20% of the US
Wow.
population,
So 1 in 5.
that's 56 million people. So as a small business or just a business in general, if you're okay with cutting 20% of your sales and you still have tons of extra cash coming in and you can spend, tens of thousands of dollars on attorneys if this issue comes up, then maybe it's a non-issue. But at the same point, if you have that type of money, then you also should be doing something fairly drastic about this. And so like putting it into perspective, like that percentage, that 56 million people in the US that you're eliminating out of your sales target, that's more people than the population of Canada, like as a whole.
As a Canadian, that is
Like,
wow.
I think it's the whole country. And that's what's just baffling is people are like, oh, it doesn't really matter. And it's like, does 20% of your sales matter to you? It matters. And so, there's definitely a risk factor. And it really is something that every business has to weigh individually. There are definitely sort of 3 different main reasons that someone needs to consider this. One is the ethical element. Is this something that ethically someone is okay with saying, no, I don't want to support people who have, an accessibility disability? There's the legal aspect in the sense of you could get sued. There's also the financial aspect. In the United States, first violation, if you're sued federally, first violation can be $50,000. If you don't comply and you're sued again, it can be $100,000. And that's on top of state laws. And so, for instance, California, you can actually sue for damages. In Florida, you cannot sue for damages currently. You can only sue to have somebody correct the issue, but it can also be attorney fees and all of that. So whether you're sued or not, long term, the issues are going to have to get corrected. And so what ends up happening is businesses go, well, I'll just wait till it happens, then I'll fix it. And it's like, well, the problem is if you wait till it happens, then you're paying all the fees
and you still have to pay
to get out of it. Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, it is something that, is a hard element for a lot of small businesses to look at. There are some big name companies in the industry, such as Sight Improve and Audio Eye, that are fairly large. They have some massive testing tools and remediation elements that can be implemented on your websites. However, they are also, Sight Improve, if that's something that a business is considering, that's about $130,000 to $150,000 a year. Wow. It's a monthly subscription. Nonprofit pricing starts at about $10,000 a month. And so it's not cheap. There are other solutions and other tools. We've partnered with a company and we have a tool that we've been utilizing on a few of our clients' websites and on our own website. And that tool does not necessarily hit 100% compliance, but it definitely hits around 95% roughly. And that's really, in today's day and age with websites, you think about the average website that adds a blog post. If it's a really active website, they may be adding 1 or 2 pages, a day. And so to have a company come in and assess whether that page was created properly, even if it's inside of a content management system like WordPress or Drupal or anything else, like having a company come in and reassess that page is a lot of work and can be very expensive if you're having to pay a dev team to come in, 2, 3, 4 hours to fix that. And so some businesses have literally gone to the point where they're like, we're just not going to have a website. We're going to point our domain at our Facebook page if it's a small business. Other ones have, we know a business who basically turned their website over to their website company and they technically don't own it. They lease it. So if they do have an issue, they'll just shut it down. And so there's been some interesting workarounds that we've been seeing some people attempt. And so it's definitely something that we feel is important to look at.
Absolutely. And, you're talking about definitely lots of things to consider for a small business who is starting to look at this and kind of consider whether or not this is something that they want to pursue. Now, you had mentioned, things like ethics being something to consider. Of course, the legalities being huge. You'd also mentioned there was kind of a third thing to consider for small businesses, kind of gauging whether this is an investment that they wanted to make. Do you recall what that third thing was?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. The three are ethically, legally, and financially. Those are the three elements.
Okay. Yeah. So you did speak to the financial one because basically what I'm hearing is that the legal ramifications can be quite large, but there is quite a financial investment to address this. Okay. Is there a way that either is there a way small businesses can do this affordably, I think is the obvious question. But I do want to honor the fact that our listeners primarily are digital agency owners. So I guess my questions are, do you think there's an opportunity here for digital agencies? Well, actually, you already answered that. Yes, there is an opportunity. What do you think is, do you have any suggestions for small businesses who are digital agencies to help their clients address this without shelling out, potentially $10,000 a month themselves?
Yeah. So there's a few elements. One is there's a lot of free website accessibility checklists, and there's a lot of things that you can do. Simply, like, one of the elements is making sure that your alt text on your images is correct and not something that, if it's a photo of a guy sitting on a bench, but your blog post is about a branding agency, don't stuff your alt text on your image with branding agency Texas. Actually provide descriptive text that is what the image is about. So many times we see this, that agencies do this with, and they will just cram as many extra keywords they can in the alt text just because it's a place that they can stuff information. And sadly, I will say that we've done that in the past. It is something that we are working on now, being aware of this, working on correcting those issues. And so it is definitely, that's one of those elements. The other one is also looking at color contrasts. If something is a little hard to read, it's probably not accessible. Font sizes, not having fonts that are way too small. And so there is what's called the WCAG. It's the Website Accessibility Guide that's put out by the W3. And so I would highly recommend any agency to take a look at that. They have some different testing tools that you can utilize and sort of scan your sites to sort of see what some of those big underlying problems are. And one of the things that we have heard in some of the lawsuits that have been going through, to whether it's state or federal, is that the sites that basically the owners get up there and go, we have no idea what website accessibility means, and we've never heard about it before, those are the ones that are getting hit with stuff. The ones who are, we've done A, B, C, and D, and we're working on X, Y, and Z, and we're making these improvements, typically are either let off the hook with a warning or something that's definitely a much less of a sentence type thing that's not as costly.
Okay, so just kind of reflect what I'm hearing back here. So I'm hearing that, if again, we're following that ethics, legalities, and finances, if this is something that you decide that you want to pursue either for your own website or, something that you want to consider in the future for the websites that you're building for clients, I'm hearing that you can, number one, mitigate your risk to some degree, your legal risk, by just familiarizing yourself with some basic things that you can do and making sure that, those policies or those practices are just part of your own internal process. But I'm also hearing that in terms of kind of the opportunity is that if this is something that you're interested in providing as a service for your clients, more so than just at the risk mitigation level, to kind of cover your own butt in things that you're producing, or, cover your client's butt at a basic level for the thing that you're producing for them, to be more accurate. I'm hearing that although the tools that kind of do it for you are available and are quite pricey, at a service level, you can potentially educate yourself on the website accessibility guide, et cetera, and create, a checklist or something like that you can kind of begin to address these issues for people, or at least make sure that that's part of your process. Did I understand that correctly?
For the most part, yes. The one thing I do definitely want to correct is like Site Improve specifically, they do not actually do any of the correction. So basically, that $10,000 a month gets you a report that you then have a development team go in and make those corrections. And
Okay,
so,
so it's not like I was kind of imagining something like Yoast or something where, it tells
no.
you just tweak this or tweak that. No, you're saying that it is a personalized analysis of the site, but you as a service provider are still responsible for doing the corrections. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and that's where so the solution we've partnered with a company and have a solution that is at a significantly reduced rate from what those are. It does not provide 100% mitigation, but it definitely provides a lot of it sort of covers a lot of the bases. And so, like one of the things that we do is it takes the images from your website, passes them off to like Google's image API, does a screen reader of what's in the image. And so it sees that there's, a dog sitting in a park next to a tree. And so it adds that as the descriptive text to the image, the alt text. And so helping mitigate some of that type of stuff automatically, where there's still the element that we can go in and help do even more for the website and help do even more to add alt text and descriptions to links and all that other stuff. And there's definitely some other elements to do there, but it helps mitigate a lot of it.
And do you think that this need is large enough that a business could, if they so choose, kind of choose this as their niche? Like a web designer, a marketer, et cetera. I guess they would probably be on more of the designer development or strategy side. Is there enough of a kind of both a demand and a need in the market for this to be, a core service for somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually something, there are a handful of companies who are currently doing that. ADA is at the forefront of their design and development. I've seen a few agencies that have sort of shifted that direction a little bit just because of this. In California alone last year, there was about 5,000 lawsuits. And then federally, there was about 10,000. And so it's definitely something that is growing at a ridiculously fast rate.
Interesting. And on the West Coast, it sounds like, even though the East Coast is often more kind of populous.
Yeah, and the reason why California is growing so fast is because people are allowed to sue for damages. And so because
Right.
in Florida, if someone files a lawsuit, they may just be filing something to get someone to fix it. And so sadly, there are people in this space who are filing lawsuits that their sole purpose of doing so is just to make some money off of it. And so we have a client who has a hotel, and they actually had a lawsuit filed against them for their pool not being ADA accessible, even though they had a rider from the city and all this other stuff. And so it's, the people who sued them for that, for their pool, literally all they do is go around and just find hotels that have pools and check and see if they're compliant or not. If they're not, they file a lawsuit and they just move on to the next one. And that is literally their full-time job.
Right, right. So what I'm hearing from this is not necessarily to assume that everybody coming to your website is, unkind and seeking to take advantage of you, but to know that, even if your audience is an audience that maybe, I don't know, like you might be tempted to kind of make some kind of decisions or assumptions about whether this is appropriate for you and your audience. It sounds like it is important to note that the small few who are really unfortunately approaching this issue unethically, often they are doing so systematically. So, even if you have, a tight knit audience of super, super amazing people and you don't think this could ever happen to you, I'm hearing that. Is that?
Yep, exactly. And sadly, there are some law firms and some people who are basically going out. They're looking at anybody who has deep pockets or capital and typically a more outdated system. And so one of the biggest ones that we have seen some lawsuits coming up for is banks, and especially like credit unions, specifically because they're a little bit more on the outdated side of the spectrum from technology, but they have money. And so, they're willing to pay and spend the money to mitigate long term, but also they have money for when a lawsuit gets filed, which is sad.
Yeah, that is really sad. Often in the digital realm, I have been very blessed, at least in my own business, to be surrounded by very like-minded, both entrepreneurs, business owners, clients, etc., along the line. So often, organizations that are very ethical and heart-driven and care about making an impact, whether or not they're for-profit or non-profit. So it's kind of sad, but also important, I think, to be reminded that there are a wide variety of people in the world. And unfortunately, there are those who are seeking to take advantage. Anyway, as I'm sure we could actually, we didn't even get into any of my questions on automation or digging into process yet. I know we could keep talking about this indefinitely, but we may have to settle for just inviting you onto the podcast again for another interview at some point, because we are reaching the end of our time together. And I do want to respect that time. So as I kind of move us towards the end here, I just have a few quick lightning round questions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So first question, what is the weirdest habit that you have that contributes to your success?
Weirdest habit.
Weirdest
oh,
habit.
Man, put me on the spot. Jeez.
We can circle back around to it if you want.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, what's the number one thing that you do to preserve your wellness?
So for me, it's just getting out. I have a small garden and just getting outside and doing that. I also do a lot of like breakfast smoothies. So just having the time to do that's great.
Yeah. Actually, the last interview I was doing, his name was Kevin. He was talking about how he enjoys going mushroom picking and diving in the ocean. So cool to know that kind of experiencing the natural world is a contribution to wellness for many of our guests.
Yep.
Okay. What gets you up in the morning?
Other than my alarm clock. No, it's really the drive to work with the businesses we get to work with. Like, most of the clients we work with just have really unique elements in what they do. And it's cool to see the wins that our clients get. We literally, in our Slack, we have a wins channel. And it's, anytime there's stuff that our clients email in and say, oh my gosh, we got, 35 leads from our website today. This is amazing. Thank you guys so much. Like, those are things that we celebrate. And for me, it's being able to help those small businesses is awesome.
Awesome. I may just have to steal that idea about a wins channel. We've been talking about motivational zaps on our end. But anyway, different conversation. Back to the lightning round. So now I'm going to circle back around to our first question. So what is the weirdest habit that you have that contributes to your success?
Man, I don't know. I think one thing I know that I do a lot of is I have ridiculous amounts of like notes, like literally on my desk right now. I have like 4 different piles. I have these like notepad things that I keep, and it is just something that I've tried getting out of. We moved to a 100% web-based CRM system, and I still keep like notepads. And although I'm, for college, I did everything, computer-based. We're 100% computer-based on everything else, but I just oddly enough, I have stacks of notepads, and I love them. I don't know.
That is interesting. I'm sure we have many listeners who are like, that's not weird. I love my notepad. I've
got some friends. I was going to say, I've got a few friends, and one's an agency owner, and they got Evernote, and they love their Evernote, and I've tried it. And I just can't, I don't know. It's just, there's something to me just sitting down and writing on paper. And that's one of the things I'll say with our packets. Like, they are PDF'd, like flattened files that are not intended to type into them. Like, you are supposed to print them out, sit down with a cup of coffee and fill it out. I think there's something to be said about just shutting your screen off for a few minutes and sort of taking a step back and really just thinking through your business. And I think that's for me. If I'm sitting in front of my computer and my phone starts to ring and I get an email and I'm sitting on Evernote and I'm trying to focus, I got 3 or 4 things going on and I just can't. And so just being able to literally just hit the power button on my screen, flick it off for a minute and sit down and just write just really helps.
I think that's a really valuable piece of insight. I know even for myself, and I am super tech queen, I do love working with mind maps and Word documents or, documents. And I'm renowned for this on my team because I can type and move information around at the speed that I think. But I too, I have a plain notebook, and then I have called my productivity planner, which is kind of my daily prioritization notebook. And I got to say, I use both of them almost on a daily basis for exactly that reason that you're saying, which is that when you need a distraction-free, I guess, space to create or space to record or space to reflect, nothing beats that pen and paper for me either. And yeah, that's not something I admit very often. I like my tech.
Yeah, and we're the same way. Like we use Google Drive and Sheets and Docs like crazy, but occasionally you need the space.
You need the space. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, what a lovely, lovely note to end a lovely conversation on. It has been an absolute pleasure, Joshua. Thanks for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay. I hope you guys have an excellent rest of your day, and I will talk to you next week. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.